Imagine trying to program a human being's risk for heart disease, obesity, or even diabetes like 40 years before it ever happens.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds completely like science fiction.
It really does.
Yeah.
But it is actively happening right now. I mean, it starts in the intrauterine environment and continues straight through the nursery.
Absolutely.
So welcome to the deep dive. We are taking a highly targeted, scientifically rigorous journey through the American Academy of Pediatric Nutrition Handbook, specifically the 6th edition.
Which is, a massive text.
Oh, it's huge. And whether you are a medical student prepping for your pediatric rotation, a young professional managing patient care, or just, a lifelong learner fascinated by human physiology, our goal here is to give you a really comprehensive, unapologetically thorough summary of this text.
Right, we want to extract the actionable clinical knowledge. But more importantly, we want to arm you with the physiological whys behind all these nutritional guidelines.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this, because before you can even begin to diagnose a nutritional deficit or advise a patient in the clinic, you have to establish a baseline. You really have to understand how to accurately measure what is happening inside that child's body.
Yeah, and the clinical assessment of growth is, well, it's the ultimate bioassay of a child's nutritional status.
The ultimate bioassay. I like that.
Right, because we cannot truly understand the impact of a diet, a disease, or any medical intervention without meticulously quantifying how that physical form is expanding. I mean, growth data is the raw material for literally any pediatric diagnosis.
I always like to picture a pediatric growth chart as a patient's metabolic ledger.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, because it is never about a single isolated snapshot in time. Like a single weight measurement tells you almost nothing.
Nothing at all.
It is about the trajectory over months and years. It's the cumulative balance of, energy intake, excretion, expenditure, and cellular storage. But if you are a young clinician today, you face a really unique visual challenge.
You do. The current obesity epidemic has severely skewed our visual baseline for what a quote-unquote normal child looks like.
Right. So if our eyes are constantly deceiving us in the exam room, how do we objectively identify a child who is, say, masking a stunting or wasting condition?
Well, we remove the visual bias entirely by relying on strict objective data plotting. The AAP guidelines dictate that for the first 3 years of life, clinicians must meticulously plot weight, length, and head circumference.
And notice the term length there, not height.
Exactly, length. It is imperative that the child is measured lying down supine on a rigid measuring board.
Because if you try to take a standing height on a squirming 2-year-old...
Oh, it's a disaster. You will compress the spine slightly, you alter the posture, and you yield a completely inaccurate percentile curve. And that could falsely trigger a major clinical intervention.
That makes perfect sense. The physics of the measurement dictate the medical response. And then at age 2, the metrics shift, right?
They do. At age 2, we transition to using the body mass index, or BMI. But pediatric BMI is a completely different animal compared to adult BMI.
How so?
Well, an adult BMI is a static, absolute number. But a pediatric BMI is dynamic. It's age and sex specific. You actually have to plot it on a standardized percentile curve to derive any clinical meaning from it.
Got it. So what are the actual cutoffs we should be looking at?
The cutoffs are very rigid. So below the 5th percentile is underweight. From the 5th to the 85th percentile is considered normal weight.
Okay, 5th to 85th is normal.
Right. Then the 85th to 95th percentile classifies the child as at risk of becoming overweight. And anything crossing above that 95th percentile is definitively overweight.
So you have this very objective mathematical ledger to rely on. But what happens when you are dealing with a severe clinical scenario?
Like what?
Say you are evaluating a child with suspected severe malnutrition. Or maybe you're in a low-resource environment where you just don't have access to precision digital scales or rigid longboards. How do you quantify the metabolic deficit then?
What's fascinating here is how the body physiologically prioritizes its own survival during starvation, and how we can actually measure that triage using just a simple tape measure.
Wait, just a tape measure?
Yeah. In severe cases, we calculate the mid-arm circumference to head circumference ratio.
Okay, break that down for me.
So a young child's head circumference directly parallels their linear growth, but more crucially, it tracks their brain growth. When caloric intake plummets, the body initiates a mechanism called brain sparing.
Brain sparing.
Right. It will actively alter vascular resistance to shunt nutrients directly to the cerebral tissue. It is fiercely protecting neurological development at all costs.
So the body will literally sacrifice its own physical structure to keep the central computer running.
Exactly. It cannibalizes itself. The mid-arm circumference fluctuates directly with total body weight, specifically subcutaneous fat and skeletal muscle mass.
Ah, I see.
So the body will aggressively strip that arm fat and muscle to fuel the brain. By dividing the mid-arm circumference by the head circumference, you get a mathematical ratio of that physiological triage.
That is incredible. What are the numbers we're looking for?
A healthy normal ratio is greater than 0.31, but if you calculate a ratio that drops below 0.25, you have a definitive clinical indicator of severe, life-threatening malnutrition.
Wow, below 0.25.
Yeah, you are mathematically capturing the body's desperate attempt to save its own brain.
That is such a brilliant, a low-tech way to capture incredibly complex metabolic data. So, having established how to read the ledger, we need to look at what happens when that ledger is operating at maximum capacity.
Right, infancy.
Exactly. A human infant triples its birth weight in the very first year of life. That is just an explosive, unparalleled rate of cellular division and tissue synthesis.
It really is the single most metabolically demanding period of human life outside the womb.
And the undisputed gold standard for fueling that massive growth is human breast milk. I mean, it is a living, dynamic tissue perfectly tailored to the infant's immune and nutritional needs.
Unquestionably.
But this raises a major question for a lot of parents and, frankly, medical students alike. If human milk is a biological masterpiece, why do the AAP guidelines explicitly recommend introducing complementary solid foods between 4 and 6 months of age?
It's a great question.
Right. If the milk is perfect, what is happening physiologically at that 120-day mark that makes it suddenly insufficient?
Well, it comes down to the shifting mathematics of energy allocation and really exhausting maternal nutrient reserves. Think about a healthy adult. Almost 100% of the calories you consume go toward basic maintenance.
Like powering your heart, your lungs, body heat.
Exactly. But an infant uses a massive percentage of their total energy expenditure specifically for the deposition of entirely new tissue. For the first 4 to 6 months, human milk has the exact energy density required to sustain both basic maintenance and that explosive tissue growth.
But I'm assuming that absolute caloric demand eventually outpaces the physical volume of milk an infant can even consume.
The caloric demand definitely surges, yeah. But the more critical issue is actually micronutrient depletion.
Oh, really? Which ones?
Primarily iron and zinc. During the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, the fetus aggressively banks maternal stores of iron, zinc, and vitamin D. However, that internal physiological bank account is finite.
Right, they only have so much saved up.
Exactly. And around the 4 to 6 month mark, those intrauterine reserves run completely dry. And while human breast milk is unparalleled in its bioavailability, the absolute quantities of iron and zinc in the milk are actually quite low.
So the infant's internal stores are empty, and the breast milk just can't replenish them fast enough.
Which is exactly why complementary foods are medically necessary at this stage. Not to replace the milk, but to fill that specific, emerging micronutrient gap. This is why the AAP highlights pureed meats and iron-fortified cereals as the ideal first complementary foods.
And the data backing this up is incredibly stark. I know the handbook details the Feeding Infants and Toddlers study, the FITS study.
Yes, the FIT study.
It demonstrated that iron and zinc are the 2 nutrients most likely to be deficient in U.S. toddlers today.
It's a huge issue.
And there is also a randomized trial detailed in the text that compared exclusively breastfed infants who were given either pureed meat or iron-fortified cereal as their very first solid food.
Right, and the results were really striking.
They were. The infants fed meat had substantially higher zinc intakes, and remarkably, they showed a significantly higher rate of head circumference growth compared to the cereal group.
Which brings us right back to our first clinical point head circumference tracks brain development. The highly bioavailable zinc and iron found in pureed meats provide the precise molecular building blocks the infant needs exactly when their endogenous stores hit 0.
That is fascinating. But there is a massive clinical trap here that clinicians have to watch out for. What is the physiological danger if a caregiver gets, say, overly enthusiastic and introduces low-calorie solid foods or just too much extra water too early in infancy?
You risk displacing the human milk, which causes immediate growth faltering. An infant's gastric capacity is incredibly small.
Tiny, right.
If you fill that tiny stomach with a low-density water-heavy food like a fruit puree, the infant will feel full. They will simply lack the physical space for the calorie-dense breast milk they desperately need to grow.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, managing hydration requires strict clinical oversight. If you are monitoring an infant's hydration, maybe due to decreased or dark urine output, the strict clinical guideline is a maximum of 225 milliliters per kilogram per day of solute-free water.
Let's break down the mechanism there. Why such a rigid limit on something as supposedly harmless as plain water? What physically happens in the infant's body if they exceed that volume?
Plain water is actually highly dangerous to an infant because their renal system is immature. A young infant's kidneys cannot concentrate or dilute urine with the efficiency of an adult kidney. If you flood their system with solute-free water, the kidneys simply cannot filter and excrete it fast enough.
So it just builds up.
Right. That free water backs up into the bloodstream, rapidly diluting the serum sodium concentration. This induces hyponatremia. And because water follows osmotic gradients, the fluid shifts from the diluted blood straight into the brain cells.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it causes cerebral edema, which leads to immediate seizures, permanent neurological damage, or even death.
Wow. You are literally managing the exact fuel-to-water mixture for a highly sensitive biological engine.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
But just as you get that engine perfectly tuned, the infant turns 2 years old and the entire metabolic landscape shifts again. As we move into the toddler and adolescent phases, a child's appetite often becomes incredibly erratic.
Very erratic.
Like one day, a toddler will eat an entire chicken breast and 2 bowls of pasta, and the next day they survive on like half a cracker in spite. For parents, it feels like a pathology.
It terrifies caregivers. I see it all the time. But it's an entirely normal physiological downregulation. After the explosive tripling of birth weight in year 1, a child's growth velocity drastically plummets.
Because they just aren't growing as fast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
From age 2 until the onset of puberty, they're only gaining a few pounds and a couple of inches per year. As that growth rate drops, their basal metabolic demand drops proportionally. The appetite center in the hypothalamus simply downregulates to match the new, much lower energy requirement.
It's kind of like a fuel gauge recalibrating. It's not a broken system. It's a highly efficient one. But toddlers do present with a very specific, uniquely gastrointestinal issue that clinicians see all the time.
Yes.
Chronic, non-specific diarrhea, historically referred to as juiceuria.
It is a very common clinical presentation. You have a toddler presenting with frequent, loose, watery stools. But when you examine them, they have completely normal weight gain, no signs of failure to thrive, and just boundless energy.
So they aren't actually sick in the traditional sense.
Right. When you take a detailed dietary history, you invariably find the parents are feeding them massive amounts of non-citrus juices, specifically apple, pear, or prune juice.
So if it isn't an autoimmune issue like celiac and it isn't a dairy allergy, what exactly is happening physically inside the lumen of the gut when a toddler drinks that much apple juice?
Think of the toddler's gut lining as a highly selective bouncer at a club.
Okay, I like that.
These specific non-citrus juices are packed with sorbitol and a heavily skewed ratio of fructose to glucose. The toddler's gastrointestinal bouncer simply cannot process and absorb that sheer volume of sorbitol.
So it just gets rejected.
It just remains locked outside in the lumen of the gut. And because sorbitol is highly osmotically active, it acts like a chemical sponge. It pulls water out of the surrounding tissues and into the intestines to balance the gradient, resulting in a rush of watery diarrhea.
So the intervention must be purely mechanical then.
It's exactly right. The intervention is simply limiting juice intake to 4 to 6 ounces a day. You just remove the osmotic load. You also ensure that dietary fat makes up about 30% of their total daily calories.
Why the fat?
Fat physically slows gastric emptying. It allows the gut more time to absorb fluids, which normalizes the bowel movements.
That perfectly illustrates how diet alters gut physics. It's brilliant. Now, let's fast forward a bit to adolescence. The growth engine turns back on full throttle for puberty.
Oh, yeah. The nutrient demands are massive.
You've got up to 1,300 milligrams of calcium a day needed for bone mineralization and a huge spike in iron requirements, especially for menstruating females to offset monthly blood loss.
Absolutely.
But the handbook details a surprisingly counterintuitive clinical presentation in adolescent sports nutrition. Imagine a highly competitive teen athlete presenting to the clinic with early onset fatigue and recurrent vasovagal syncope, basically fainting spells.
Right.
The immediate assumption from a coach or parent is usually hypoglycemia or dehydration.
And very often, the actual physiological culprit is salt depletion. And it's often caused by a well-intentioned public health message.
Ah, so.
We spent decades telling the public that a healthy diet means a low-salt diet to prevent adult hypertension. Adolescents and their parents absorb this message. But when you combine a highly restrictive, low-sodium diet with the immense daily sweat loss of a competitive teen athlete, you create a massive sodium deficit.
And without sodium, the vascular system basically collapses.
Precisely. Sodium is the primary extracellular cation responsible for holding water inside the blood vessels.
So it's keeping the pressure up.
Right. When sodium levels plummet from sweating without dietary replacement, the body loses its ability to maintain intravascular fluid volume. When that athlete stands up quickly, they experience orthostatic hypotension. Their blood pressure drops, the brain is momentarily deprived of oxygen, and they faint.
Wow. So the clinical fix is what?
It's remarkably simple.
Right.
Introduce sports drinks or lightly salted foods to restore the osmotic pressure in the blood.
Speaking of well-intentioned dietary rules going awry, how do restrictive or fad diets impact the physiological development of a child? Let's say a family places a young child on a strict, unsupplemented vegan diet.
Well, a vegan diet can absolutely support a child's health, but it requires meticulous, almost mathematical nutritional planning. The primary risk in early childhood isn't necessarily a deficiency in the quality of the plant protein, but an issue of simple physical volume.
Volume again.
Yes, plant-based diets are exceptionally high in fiber and very low in caloric density. A young child has a very small stomach capacity.
Right.
They will literally fill their stomach with bulky vegetables and feel entirely satiated long before they have absorbed enough total calories to sustain their growth trajectory.
So they hit a volume ceiling before they hit a caloric threshold.
Exactly.
What about the opposite end of the spectrum? What happens when an adolescent adopts a high-protein, extremely low-carbohydrate fad diet?
That presents a completely different biochemical threat. When you drastically eliminate carbohydrates, you are inherently stripping the diet of fruits and vegetables.
Which are pretty important.
Very. Fruits and vegetables provide the essential alkaline base that the blood needs to buffer acids. Without them, the massive intake of animal protein generates a highly acidic metabolic byproduct called a high renal acid load.
And the body has a very narrow blood pH window it must maintain to survive, right?
Very narrow.
So how does it neutralize all that acid without dietary vegetables?
It taps into its largest internal reserve of alkaline minerals,
Oh.
the human skeleton.
Oh, no.
Yeah. To buffer the acidic blood, the body actively upregulates osteoclast activity to leach calcium directly out of the bones. Over time, this chronic calcium extraction can significantly impair adolescent bone mineral density, setting them up for early osteoporosis.
That is terrifying. But there is one specific, extremely low-carbohydrate, high-fat diet that clinicians actually prescribe as a severe medical intervention, right? The ketogenic diet.
Yes. The medical ketogenic diet is a prime example of using food as pharmacology.
How does that work?
It is heavily utilized in pediatric neurology for children with intractable epilepsy who simply do not respond to traditional anticonvulsant medications.
Okay.
By forcing the body to metabolize fat as its primary fuel source instead of carbohydrates, the liver begins churning out ketone bodies, specifically beta-hydroxybutyrate.
And those ketones do something incredibly unique when they reach the brain, right?
They do. They cross the blood-brain barrier and fundamentally alter cerebral metabolism. They upregulate the synthesis of GABA, which is the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. This effectively raises the seizure threshold and drastically reduces seizure frequency.
Wow.
However, because the diet is intentionally skewed, it requires intense clinical monitoring and aggressive micronutrient supplementation to prevent severe physiological deficit.
It really is a chemical intervention disguised as a meal plan.
Exactly.
Now, having covered dietary restrictions, we have to look at what happens when the metabolic ledger is forced into the red, not by choice, but by disease or environment. We are looking at failure to thrive, or FTT.
Right.
And FTT isn't just a diagnosis of a child not eating enough.
No, not at all. FTT must be viewed through a comprehensive ecological lens. It is the final common pathway of multiple intersecting stressors.
Like what?
Well, it could be an occult physiological issue like undiagnosed celiac disease destroying the gut villi. It could be a profound socioeconomic issue like severe food insecurity. Or it could be a psychological breakdown in the caregiver-child feeding relationship.
So how do you even start to unpack that?
To properly diagnose the root cause, a clinician must gather a meticulous 3 to 5 day diet diary to mathematically analyze exactly what is or isn't crossing the child's lips.
And once you isolate the cause, the clinical goal is achieving catch-up growth. And the physiology of catch-up growth is brutal. It means the child must grow at 2 to 3 times the normal rate for their corrected age just to claw their way back to their baseline genetic trajectory.
It's a massive metabolic undertaking.
Right. So if a child needs double the calories to execute this hypergrowth, why can't a clinician just instruct the parents to double the size of the child's meals?
Because of the exact same physiological limitation we discussed with the vegan diet, gastric capacity. You physically cannot force a toddler with FTT to eat double the volume of food. The stomach won't hold it. They will simply refuse the food or vomit it back up.
They just don't have the real estate.
Exactly. The only viable clinical solution is to dramatically increase the nutrient density of the limited volume they can tolerate.
So how is that achieved practically in a clinical setting?
Clinicians utilize commercial 30 kilocalorie per ounce medical formulas. A standard over-the-counter infant formula provides about 20 kilocalories per ounce. By prescribing a 30 kilocal formula, we deliver 50% more energy in the exact same physical fluid volume.
That's a huge difference.
It is. And crucially, prescribing a pre-mixed commercial formula serves as a vital safety net. It completely bypasses the need for highly stressed, overwhelmed parents to attempt complex manual fortification of powders at home.
Oh, which could be dangerous.
Very. Mixing errors frequently lead to dangerous osmotic diarrhea, which just makes the FTT worse.
You are guaranteeing the exact delivery of the required medicine, which in this case is concentrated energy.
Perfectly said.
And this concept of a hypermetabolic demand isn't exclusive to FTT. We see it play out in specific chronic illnesses too. For instance, why do pediatric patients with sickle cell disease require significantly higher caloric baselines than their peers?
It is entirely driven by their resting energy expenditure. In sickle cell disease, the abnormally shaped red blood cells have a drastically shortened lifespan and are constantly being destroyed in a process called hemolysis.
So their body's constantly cleaning up and rebuilding.
Right. To compensate for this massive cellular loss, the child's bone marrow is operating in a state of chronic hyperdrive, a constant reticulocytosis, tirelessly synthesizing new red blood cells.
So they're basically running a marathon just by
maintaining their blood volume, exactly.
Yeah.
That relentless 247 cellular manufacturing requires an immense amount of background ATP energy, significantly elevating their baseline caloric needs.
Wow. They are burning massive amounts of energy just to exist. Contrast that with cystic fibrosis, where the primary issue isn't just burning the energy, but physically capturing it from the food in the first place.
Yes, CF is a completely different mechanism. In cystic fibrosis, a genetic defect causes extremely thick viscous mucus to obstruct the pancreatic ducts. This physically blocks essential digestive enzymes from ever reaching the gut lumen. The result is obligate malabsorption. The child can eat massive volumes of food, but the complex fats and proteins simply pass right through the body unabsorbed.
That is so frustrating. How do you fix a mechanical blockage like that?
Clinicians must prescribe oral pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy with every single meal. Furthermore, because their resting energy expenditure is so high from chronic lung infections and the sheer work of breathing, many CF patients require nocturnal nasogastric feeding tubes.
Oh, wow. Pumping all night.
Yes, pumping concentrated formula into their stomachs all night long just to keep their metabolic ledger positive.
It is a relentless, lifelong battle to override a broken physiological system, which leads us perfectly into our final area. Inborn errors of metabolism and diabetes.
This is where things get really acute.
Right. What happens when the cellular machinery itself is fundamentally missing? Imagine you are a medical student in the neonatal intensive care unit. A newborn baby crashes, presenting with lethargy, vomiting, and tachypnea. You suspect a metabolic crisis, like an organic acidemia or a urea cycle defect, but the exact genetic lab results won't be back for days.
Right, you don't have time to wait.
Exactly. What is the immediate physiological emergency protocol?
In a severe metabolic crisis, the infant's body has shifted into a state of catabolism. It is rapidly breaking down its own internal proteins and fats for energy.
Which is usually a normal starvation response.
Usually, yes. However, because they are missing a specific critical enzyme, that biochemical breakdown halts midway. This results in the massive accumulation of highly toxic byproducts, such as ammonia or organic acids.
And then those build up in the blood.
And they cross into the brain. They rapidly destroy neurological tissue. So the emergency clinical protocol is absolute. You must immediately reverse the catabolism and forcefully flip the body's metabolic switch into an embolism.
How exactly do you force that switch in a crashing neonate?
You immediately start an intravenous fluid infusion containing at least 10% dextrose, running it aggressively at 1.5 to 2 times the normal maintenance rate.
Why so much sugar?
The massive rapid influx of glucose forces the baby's pancreas to secrete a surge of insulin. Insulin is the body's ultimate anabolic hormone. It signals every cell in the body to immediately stop breaking down internal proteins and fats.
Which instantly halts the endogenous production of those toxic metabolites.
Exactly. And simultaneously, you must completely stop all dietary protein and fat from entering the gut.
You flood the engine with incredibly clean fuel so it stops cannibalizing its own toxic parts.
That's exactly what's happening.
And for many of these inborn errors, surviving that initial NICU crisis is only step one. For conditions like PKU or phenylketonuria, they require a diet for life.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, conditions like PKU challenge your fundamental definition of what food is. Well, for a child with PKU, normal dietary protein is a potent, irreversible neurotoxin. They genetically lack the enzyme phenylalanine hydroxylase, meaning they cannot break down the essential amino acid phenylalanine.
Which is in almost all protein.
Right. Therefore, their entire medical management relies on highly specialized synthetic medical foods formulas engineered to provide every single essential amino acid except phenylalanine. For them, their diet is their lifelong, life-saving medication.
That is profound. Let's apply these principles of metabolic control to a much more common disorder, pediatric type 1 diabetes.
A huge paradigm shift here over the last few decades.
Oh, absolutely. Historically, managing diabetes in a child was incredibly rigid and disruptive. A child had to eat a highly restrictive free diet, consuming exact volumes of food at exact times of day just to match the peak action of their long-acting insulin injections. How has technology flipped that physiological script today?
The entire paradigm has shifted thanks to insulin pumps and the method of carbohydrate counting. We no longer force a child's life to match their insulin, we match the insulin to their life.
I love that phrasing.
Using an insulin pump, a child or caregiver simply calculates the exact grams of carbohydrates they're about to ingest, whether that is a bowl of broccoli or a massive slice of birthday cake.
They just plug the number in.
They input that number, and the pump calculates and delivers the precise microdose of rapid-acting insulin required to process that specific carbohydrate load in real time.
It restores a massive level of metabolic autonomy and psychological normalcy. They can actually eat the same nutritious, varied meals as their peers.
It absolutely requires intense clinical education and rigorous compliance, but the end result is a normalized relationship with food, which is honestly the ultimate overarching goal of any pediatric nutritional therapy.
It truly is the gold standard of care. Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive, we have a quick clinical review exercise to cement these concepts.
Let's do it.
If you are a medical student or clinician listening, see if you can diagnose this.
Yeah.
Imagine a 15-month-old toddler presents to your clinic. The parents report the child has chronic watery diarrhea multiple times a day. However, your clinical assessment shows completely normal weight gain, no failure to thrive, and the child is incredibly active. The parents proudly report the child eats a very healthy diet packed with organic apple and pear juices. What is the most likely diagnosis? What is the exact cellular mechanism causing it? And what is your clinical intervention?
Well, the diagnosis is toddler's diarrhea, historically known as juiceria.
Right.
The physiological cause is an osmotic load in the gut lumen, resulting from sorbitol malabsorption. It's acting as a sponge and pulling water into the intestines.
And fix.
The clinical intervention is completely mechanical. Limit the juice intake to 4 to 6 ounces per day and ensure the child's diet consists of roughly 30% fat to slow gastric emptying and normalize fluid absorption.
The physics of the gut at work. Now, as we close out this comprehensive review, we want to leave you with one final, profound thought to mull over regarding the long-term impact of everything we've discussed today.
This brings us to a concept known as Barker's hypothesis.
Barker's hypothesis.
Right. It posits that the intrauterine environment, specifically the nutritional status and metabolic stress of the mother during pregnancy, alongside the very early infant feeding period, literally programs the child's lifelong metabolic responses.
So it's hardwiring them.
Exactly. It suggests that our modern epidemics of adult-onset obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease are largely hardwired into our cellular machinery before we even learn to walk. It's entirely based on how our early metabolism adapted to nutritional stress.
Which leaves us with this provocative question for you to explore on your own. If we know that the chronic, devastating adult diseases of tomorrow are being molecularly programmed in the womb and the nursery today, how might we need to radically redesign our approach to prenatal care, maternal nutrition, and pediatric intervention?
Are we spending all our healthcare resources at the end of the timeline when we should be investing them at the very beginning?
It's definitely something to think about. We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the AAP Pediatric Nutrition Handbook. We've explored everything from the triage of severe malnutrition to the molecular mechanics of an inborn metabolic crisis. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we will catch you next time.